Melbourne truly is the king of sports as far as hosting big events. We have the Grand Prix, the Australian Open, AFL, cricket, all sorts of stuff. We've even got the WWE Super Showdown coming to Melbourne this October. And this past weekend we had the Melbourne Esports Open. Yeah, Melbourne is the best. Melbourne number one. Whoop, whoop. Suck it, Sydney.
Oh, suck it, Sydney, you say. Let's not get too cocky there, kid.
What?
Sydney, they had the Overwatch Contenders Tournament. The second season occurred at the Melbourne Esports Open, and Sydney cleaned up. So let's not get too cocky about saying that Melbourne is the best, Melbourne number one. The stats do not agree with that.
Well, we still hosted it. The Gaming Lovers Podcast with Brendo and Jem. G'day and welcome to the Gaming Lovers Podcast, episode number 20.
Oh, we've turned 20.
Yes.
This podcast can legally drink in Japan.
Well, we were able to legally drink in Australia
In
and
Japan.
the UK 2 episodes ago.
In Japan.
We've still got to wait one more to be legal in the US. Anyway, I'm Jem.
And I'm healthy again.
Yay!
What a shock.
Congratulations,
I
Brendo.
sound like an actual functioning human. Brendo here, feeling rather fit and flighty today.
Good.
It's like when I'm like a rubber band, a giant human rubber band, and I've got all that energy stored up from being bedridden for almost 2 full weeks, and now it's just all unleashed and I'm off and racing now.
It's been an exciting time here in Melbourne with the Melbourne Esports Open this past weekend, as well as Father's Day. And unfortunately, we ourselves did not get to go down to the event because of, other obligations.
Sorry, quick sidebar.
And friends.
Is Father's Day worldwide on the same day?
No.
Okay, well, we had Father's Day.
Exactly.
Well, I did not have Father's Day because I'm not a father.
We have ferrets.
I'm a ferret. Sorry for distracting you. Where were we?
So this weekend we had the MEO 2018, which is very exciting. Rod Laver Arena, which is often used for like the Australian Open and the like. A lot of big concerts are held there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Usually where WWE would hire out, but they're going for the MCG this time. Ambitious. But it's a big place and they filled it to the brim with gamers. They did really well. It got a really good response. And some of the photos coming out of the event looks pretty good. I'm like super jealous that I didn't get to go.
I feel threatened.
Why?
Well, I used to be among the pinnacle of gamers in this state, and I feel like an absolute nobody now.
You've been eclipsed by many, many, many younger kids.
Oh,
That's for
absolutely.
sure.
Absolutely no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm. But we didn't just have Melbourneites. There was people coming from all over Australia to compete at the Open, which I think is pretty cool. And we actually had a correspondent there this weekend getting the scoop for us. Jamie was doing some groundwork, seeing what was going on, getting all the latest news, and even testing out some games that they had on the floor.
On the floor. That's not a good place to store games. They should go back in their cases and back in the shelf.
The show
That's
floor.
how discs get scruffed. Scruffed.
Did you have a good time?
Yeah, it was awesome. It was crazy. Because I've watched a lot of esports online and stuff like that, and you always think, oh, how cool would it be? And then you actually, you go to the Esports Open, which is obviously like the first in Australia.
Yeah.
And to see sort of the same setup you would see at a COD World Champs or, of a League of Legends championship in Asia or something like that. To see the same setup in Rod Laver Arena was just like, wow, like crazy.
Yeah, it's
Absolutely
awesome to
crazy.
see like that shift in culture as well, where it's becoming, I think, a bit more accepted as this thing rather than kind of laughed at,
That's it. And the demographic, when we got there, our sort of minds were like, oh, well, hang on, we're going to get there. It's going to be sort of 85% of the people are going to be sort of between 18 and 22, and they're all going to be guys. And then you get there and you realise, 50% of the people there are, fathers and mothers of kids that are trying to play, come in and play with Fortnite and things like that.
Yeah.
And you're like, this is crazy. And when because they had the Rod Laver set up obviously for the major events there, the finals and stuff. But then they had Margaret Court Arena was set up as a smaller venue.
Wow.
And they had so in Margaret Court Arena they had the same sort of setup that you saw over in the big stage, but on a smaller scale. And the opportunity was like those were the open tournaments. So anyone could enter as long as you had a ticket. You could enter a tournament. So when you sat down and watched sort of the fortnight stage in Margaret Court Arena, and there's I think there's about 9 or 10 groups of 4 set up there, and every hour they roll in sort of a new 20 or 30 players, and you see I spoke to a few of the dads, I suppose you want to call them, all the dads that were there, and you will look down and you see sort of 30, 15, 20, 30 sort of 10, 12-year-old kids playing. It would have been, for them, it would have been crazy, and then to see how proud their parents are, and obviously in the past it was sort of shunned upon playing games, but to see them down there supporting their kids like they would be at a football match, or
Yeah, and that's the thing, the atmosphere. Crazy. You can watch as many streams as you want online. You can watch esports online, but the atmosphere of being there in person, my goodness,
different.
what a difference.
Yeah, and the amount of cheering and oohs and ahs that came from both stages. The fortnight stage on the Saturday, when the fortnight was running both days, but on the Saturday when the fortnight stage started, my mate and I went and sort of watched the first match. And in the first match, there was one group of 4 that managed to get a victory royale. And so they showed, they had Loser Fruit, who's a YouTube streamer, Twitch streamer. They had her in a group and they were showing her match, and they managed to come sort of 9th or 10th. And everyone was like, oh, yeah, that was cool. And then they switched to one of the other groups who were right at the very end. And it was, the group of 4 there was like a 12-year-old kid there. There was sort of a mid-20s-year-old. There was a sort of, teenage girl as well. It was a complete mixture of this team. And then, everyone in the crowd sort of started watching their match on the big screen. And it was commentated on as well by, some experts and a few other people in the industry. And they were commentating this match. And they ended up winning. And the crowd erupted. And, you see all these little kids screaming because a victory royale doesn't come around that often.
Yeah.
And to see that for the very first game was amazing.
The next generation of heroes being
exactly.
brought in.
I loved seeing teams in matching outfits. I thought that was so cool.
Yeah, it was just, especially because, you look at they got the opportunity to sit on the stage, and to sort of look up from their screens and see, maybe 5,000 people in a crowd. That would have been surreal for some of these kids. And the thing is, it's only going to spur them on to want to do it more.
Yeah.
Kids all over Australia playing football and want to become AFL stars and cricket stars and all that stuff. But when they get the opportunity to actually be at a venue or an event like this and look up and see, I could actually do this, as a career, basically.
Yeah.
It's going to spur a lot more kids into that industry. And that's only a good thing, I suppose, for us gaming lovers.
Yeah, especially if you're not athletically inclined, if you're a bit more of an intellect, then
exactly.
This is a great alternative to kind of still have a similar kind of career, but, on a whole other scale now. It's a pretty awesome age we live in.
Yeah, exactly. And even to see some of the guys from the main stage in the Overwatch finals, sort of walking around, people getting photos and signatures from them, and there were signings and things like that. It's you start to realise that you can become a celebrity, basically.
Yeah.
And these guys, they just live in the suburbs of Melbourne or Sydney. They managed to kind of become the best that they can be, and then managed to get on stage, and all of a sudden they've got sort of 10,000 over a couple of days walking around taking photos of them.
Hopefully this is a big pinnacle event for esports in Australia. Most of the time we've had to travel overseas to actually try and enter these things and try to break into established ecospheres of gaming in other countries. But now
Yeah,
we can have our own leagues, our own standings, our own heroes.
And have people
Yeah.
come from other countries to compete against us here.
That's
So
it.
that would
And
be interesting.
The classic examples I can think of would be, our current Australian Rocket League tournament league. So the Rocket League at the moment for Australia is right now it's being broadcast on Channel 10 every week.
Isn't that just awesome?
I know. So I remember seeing it about 3 or 4 weeks ago. It was a Sunday morning, and the AFL was on that afternoon. I was going to watch, the AFL, and I was like, I wonder if there's any sort of pre-game show. I turned on the TV, and Channel 10 was on, and Rocket League.
Rocket League's there instead. My goodness.
And it was the sort of the Australian sort of league of Rocket League, being broadcast on Channel 10 with commentators and the whole work. So
yeah,
AFL being probably the primary sport in Australia is heading into its finals. It's going to be an off season, so there is an opening for esports to swoop in the next few months and really make a stamp if they could. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. With a few of the gaming lounges in Melbourne sort of running a few of the events that are coming up, hopefully they can draw big crowds and
capitalise on that for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
So while you were there this past weekend, Jamie, did you have a chance to get your hands on any other games and play yourself?
Yeah. So they had the JB Hi-Fi zone, which was basically a expo style setup.
Mm-hmm.
They advertised a few of the games that you could get your hands on first when they came out. So there was Sony's Spider-Man. There was Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Division 2, Starlink, Ori and the Will of the Wisps. There was also Spyro, Ignited, and there's a few others.
That's an impressive list of games to get your advanced playtime on.
What did you play?
I played sort of a bit of everything. The main one I sort of played was Marvel's Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
They had sort of lounge setups at the Sony booth. And so you could sort of spend sort of 15, 20 minutes on the game instead of sort of
just
one playthrough.
Yep.
So me and my mate kind of sat there and played that a fair bit. And, that was really cool. They had, obviously being Sony, they had it set up on PS4 Pros. So you were playing it in the full 4K HDR sort of setup. And it just looked amazing. So,
yeah. That's definitely on our list when it comes out, I think.
Yeah, I know, it definitely was. And they had the one I was mainly sort of looking forward to playing was the Spyro Ignited trilogy, and they had the same demo from E3, which was the Treetops demo. So even though I've kind of seen a lot of gameplay of that demo, to be able to actually play it and then have the same, to actually feel the same mechanics from the original.
Yeah.
That really when that's what hits home when you actually get your hands on the controller and feel the same sort of physics and mechanics from the original, then it sort of hits home and you realise, oh wow, this is my childhood.
That's awesome.
What a hype man! He's got me excited for Spyro all over again.
Yeah, that's it. It was pretty cool.
So, what would you rate the weekend overall, Jamie?
It was certainly like a one-of-a-kind thing, but in saying that, they're obviously going to do more and more. To know that, sweet, it's going to come back. There's going to be another sort of Esports Open maybe next year, or things like that. It's kind of like it's really exciting knowing that you can sort of look forward to that, and you're not sort of going, oh yeah, that was awesome. It was a one-off. We're never going to see the next one.
Never going to be that happy again.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, but now you know that there's going to be more. So you sort of it's sort of reignited my love for that competitive esports scene, especially now that I'm a little bit older. Sort of, back in the day when you're a teenager, you used to dream of becoming an esports champion, I suppose, and then you sort of lose that touch when you have a family and children and things like that, which I do. So to sort of reignite that passion was amazing. So
sounds like it was a rousing success. There's certainly a demand. I'm sure there will be a resurgence in the a return to form of all this esports in Australia. and looking forward to what the future holds for esports in Oz.
Would you say that it was value for money, the tickets that you had for the weekend?
Oh, 100%. I paid for a standard ground pass, which gained entry to the sort of top tier seating of the main event, which was it didn't matter where you sat. The atmosphere and the experience was unbelievable anyway. And the ground pass, which was I think $37, you could basically, it's a ticket to any of the open tournaments as well.
Yeah.
So if you bought a ground pass, there was no extra extra money spent, or sort of extra things you needed to do to be able to actually enter some of these tournaments. You could walk in the door, register, and then or you find yourself, you go, oh, hang on a sec, wow, I'm actually on the stage.
Fantastic.
So, to be able to enter, and there was I think there was something like 27 total tournaments overall.
Wow,
and to be able to enter sort of one or two of them, depending on the time slots and things, to be able to enter one or two of them based off your single ground pass ticket was definitely worth the money. So
that's awesome.
That's what we like to hear. Excellent stuff.
That's it.
Well, hopefully we will get to go to the next one.
That's it. Well, I'll be at PAX and the EB Expo, which is awesome. The EB Expo coming to Melbourne.
Yes.
This year. It's usually hosted in Sydney.
You'll be our official correspondent for that too, since we're going to be in Japan. So
yeah, you'll be in Japan. Yeah.
Yes, we're excited to be in Japan.
And hopefully can get all the intel.
Yes. We'll be counting on you for all the latest news while we are in the land of the rising sun. Thank you so much, Jamie, for being our correspondent for this weekend at the Melbourne Esports Open.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right, before we get into our special topic to do with, because it's the 20th episode, we're going to be looking at games from 20 years ago.
Yes, indeed.
Before we jump into that, gaming goals time. How did you do?
Well, I am now playing in Yakuza 5 as a former pro baseballer. Because they love their baseball in Japan.
Oh, they do. It is their national sport.
It's well loved. And
you would think it'd be sumo wrestling, right? Because it's kind of iconic and linked, obviously, with Japan.
Why not
but
combine
no,
the two?
It's baseball.
You slug the ball, and then you got to waddle your way to the base, and then you have to there's a defender there in his little team's little loincloth.
I'm just imagining them doing those baseball slides in their what do they wear?
It may not be a slide. They're quite round. It may be a roll.
What is it called that they wear that kind of looks like a nappy that's giving them a wedgie?
A diaper.
I don't know. There's probably an official name for them. I can't think of it off the top of my head. Anyway, that mental picture is going to stay with me for a while. Please change the subject.
Baseball.
Change it more.
Japanese sumo wrestling. Wait a second.
Not helping. So how are you going with the game?
Well, like I said, I'm in the second to last section. There's still the finale to go where all the characters meet up, just like a big Avengers-style crossover with all these characters that I've come to love over this incredible game. Mm-hmm. I've said it before, every Yakuza entry in this series has captured my heart even more than the last, which for a series 5 deep is quite rare.
Yeah.
The side missions for him, of course, all involve baseball skills. He has baseball skills in his combat style, even the old double-handed baseball swing without an actual club. No, they're not called clubs.
Bats.
What are they called? Bats. Oh, goodness. I am not a sportsman. But yeah, the story's still going well. However, most of my attention this week has gone into Octopath Traveler. Mm-hmm. Now, that's a game where I looked at my playtime tally this week and noticed it was well into double digits before I even realised it had. And I'm astounded because that game, I've mentioned its beauty.
Yep.
But you see, with a true relationship, you love what's on the inside just as much, if not more, than simple visuals. And boy, that game has a nice heart beating inside of it.
And it's a beautiful game too. So it's the whole package.
Yeah, but it's so strange approaching a JRPG with such a free-form, choose your own sort of direction to go in this world.
Yeah.
You pick one of 8 characters to start with, and that in itself is almost crippling for some people. It's like, which one do I start with? I don't know. I don't know any of these characters. I don't know what they do. I don't know what their abilities are.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, why? I pick the thief because I like sneakies in games. That's fun. And then from there, everyone else, you can see on the world map where they are based, and you can choose to go whichever one you want to.
Mm-hmm.
I have recruited about 6 so far and been dabbling here and there with some of their things, but mostly I just want to recruit the whole 8 so I can have the true Octopath in my travels.
So how far along do you think you are in the game so far?
In Octopath Traveler?
Mm-hmm.
Not far at all. I have no idea how long each character's campaign is, because you'd think in a game like this it would be almost like 8 separate sub-stories, but you can choose to do them in any order you want. You could do one person's entire campaign if you could struggle through it. The game scales its difficulty, so the more characters you have and the higher level they are,
the harder the fights are.
Yeah, presumably. I mean, I haven't spent that much time with it to fully grasp how well it scales if I keep doing one character's thing. But I've pretty much done chapter 1 for most of the characters. And I've noticed that the recommended level for some of the other things keeps climbing. So the more experience I get, the higher they say, hey, no, settle down. Right, we're going to make it a bit more tricky for you. But it's been good. Voice acting's been relatively good across the board. There's one female character in particular I do not like playing as. Her story, because everyone in her village speaks in like a weird combination of old English and bad.
I was gonna say, because I think I watched you play like a bit of that, and I think that was you're getting some of the backstory of like her sensei or master or whatever who'd gone missing.
Oh.
And I was just listening to it, and I'm like, it sounded like they were trying too hard to make it sound kind of like almost Shakespearean, but not quite knowing how to.
Be hearing what I am saith to thou.
Yes.
And it's like, ugh, no. If anyone picked that character first, because she looks badass. She's a huntress.
And she can summon animals.
She has a giant snow leopard thing to help her.
Mm-hmm.
She has a bow and arrow. It's awesome. But if you pick that, you may be turned off this game. So if you have started with Hannette, or whatever her name was, please give the game more of a chance than just her intro.
Yes. And she's got an interesting voice, because the voice is lovely, but because of the way it's delivered too, it sounds a little like monotone.
Yeah, 100% voice direction, not voice actor talent.
Yes. And that was one of those things like I didn't want to say that it was bad acting. I was just like, that just seems like that was the way it was scripted and made to be for this character and for her personality. I think she's meant to be very straight-laced. That's what, from the few minutes I watched you, I'm like, I kind of picked up on that. And I'm like, oh no, like if I play this, I'm not playing as her. Like, I don't know if I'd want to recruit her, because my goodness, this is irritating me. Because with the Old English, I mean, if it had been done right, it wouldn't bother me as much. I love Shakespeare and I can read a lot of that kind of Old English, no problem.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a weird mix of modern and Old English, and it didn't quite work.
Yeah.
Like, it was very jarring.
And all the characters that speak that way, it just sort of doesn't feel, it doesn't stick the landing.
It's not organic at all. So to me, I feel like that unfortunately is kind of detracts a little bit from what is otherwise looking like a pretty awesome game.
That's basically the only negative I have for it. And as a counterpoint, the latest character that I've joined on my merry little way, the merchant, Tressa, is absolutely like a gorgeous little sister that you just want to hug. Her voice is just lovely.
That's good.
Fire Emblem, I haven't touched. And I haven't missed it, to be honest. I'll get to it eventually, but hey, there's only so many gaming hours in a week. And we have been busies.
Very busy this week. I have been exceptionally busy this week. Between babysitting and lots of work, like more work than normal this week. I have had very little time for games, unfortunately.
Yeah, see, I work the same amount of hours. It's just I don't know which hours they will be in a week.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it difficult for me to schedule when I can do my gaming. But for you, it's even worse because you never know what the day will bring.
No. So there are some days where I could probably feel like a pro gamer and like play games all day and have no work and feel very much like a dole bludger. Or being on the dole is, what is it in the States? Welfare? People living off that and sitting on the couch and doing nothing else. And that's what my life can feel like some weeks when no work comes in. But then the times when I do have work, it's very, very busy. And this week I just started a huge project, like the length of reading The Hobbit, which for those who don't know is around 90,000 words.
90,000.
Yes. So it's a lot, and there's, a quota that I have to record on a daily basis so we can get it in and get it sent to those who are going to be editing it and putting it together for this big project. So trying to meet those deadlines and keeping my voice healthy and on top of all the other stuff, bits and pieces that you do in life have meant that I've had very little gaming time this week, unfortunately.
Aww.
Sad face. I have played a little bit of Period Cube. I stress a little bit. Managed to finish one more story arc and piece together a little bit more of this weird story, and I have not yet completely had all of my questions answered as far as some of those plot holes.
As a visual novel, do you find it's written well? Are the characters three-dimensional enough that they don't just feel like walking cliches, which can happen quite easily in visual novels?
It takes a while for them to get what I would say their meat of their character. Like, they feel very shallow for most of the game. It's not really until the last section of their stories that they start to where you go, oh, okay. And then they give you more to them. But to be fair, I've only really had 2 story arcs. And so I think there might be some other characters that I've had run-ins with, but I haven't actually done their storylines yet. Mm-hmm. And there's one in particular who I think would be actually quite fascinating, but I haven't done that one. So I will get there. Normally I fly through visual novels, but I've been so distracted by other stuff that I just haven't had time or the inclination to sit down and read / play the visual novel. But I have played a bit of Persona 5 and been reliving that and enjoying that very much. And I'm just about to get to probably my least favourite dungeon / palace, which is very easy to get lost in. So I'm going to get you to guide me through it so I don't get stuck.
I'll be your co-pilot.
Yes.
Not a problem.
For those who have played it, it's the one where you're in space. That's all I'll say. And it's notoriously tricky if you accidentally take the wrong door. So I don't want to do that this time around. I'm like, I just want to get through that section as quickly as possible. Otherwise it's a little bit too, I think, monotonous for me.
Understandable.
Mm-hmm. All right, I think it is time to jump into our main topic. Share the love. Follow us on Twitter at Brendo and Jem. That's BRENDOJEM.
Now, my dear, one of the most delightful things about being a long-term video gamer is when you get reminded, on this day, such and such years ago, this game came out. And you're like, oh, the warm fuzzies. I remember that game very fondly. It came out how many years ago?
Yes, and suddenly you feel very old and you can't believe that it's been 20 years. 20 long years ago.
Well, that's just the thing, right? We were both born in the 80s. We will date ourselves in this episode. And 1998 doesn't sound like it should be that long ago, right?
No.
Because we lived the early 2000s and we're still in the early 2000s, aren't we? Oh no, wait, we're at the tail end of the next decade. Mm-hmm. So yes, 1998, 20 years ago, our 20th episode, I thought it would be fun to look back 2 decades, 2 whole decades, and see what the gaming landscape was like back when we were in What? I was in early high school.
I would have been 10.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
little Jemmy.
I would have been in primary school.
Little 10-year-old Jem.
Mm-hmm.
Were you a video gamer at that point in your life?
Oh, yeah, I'd say so. We had our Nintendo 64 somewhere around that point.
Mhm.
I know that was roughly around the age that we got that. And I had my Game Boy Color, and before that we had like the other different variations of Game Boy and the little things.
You know how much I wanted a Game Boy Color?
That was a big Christmas present. That was probably one of my favourite Christmas presents that I've ever been given. And it was purple, and I loved it.
Well, I've mentioned a few times in this history lesson of Brendo's gaming landscape. For many years, I was well behind, as far as current video games went. We got our Sega Master System 2, and that's basically all I had for the longest time. And by the time maybe 97 rolled around, I'd finally gotten a Sega Genesis, or Mega Drive, as they were known in this nation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that is a generation behind of getting a new console. You know, sometimes you buy like a new car, but it's not a new car.
It's a used car.
But it's new for you.
Pre-owned.
But it's new for you.
Yes.
So when you tell people, I got a new car, they're like, oh, what did you get? And you're like, oh, don't get too excited. It's like a 1990 Laser. Yeah, don't get thrilled. It's
Well, if
not
you
a new
ask my
car.
dad, like sometimes getting old cars are better because that means you can buy hot rods.
Yeah, well, your dad's new cars are the definition of old cars.
Yes, the old classics that cost a lot to fix.
But yes, so when the 5th generation of consoles was rolling around, I'm talking your Sony PlayStation, I'm talking your Nintendo 64. Poor little Brendo had just gotten his Sega Mega Drive.
Mm-hmm.
That got me a little bit of ridicule in the schoolyard, and I was the video game outcast for a little while because I was so far behind the times.
Poor little window.
Thankfully, my best bud at the time had current Nintendo consoles.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realised when I was thinking back 20 years ago, 1998 was the year where I started to catch up. And not only catch up, I started to overtake people.
Mm.
Because within a span of about 18 months, I got a Nintendo 64, a Sony PlayStation, and, get this, a Sega Dreamcast. The first two, not so uncommon amongst my group of friends. The latter, I was the only kid on the block who had one. And then it promptly failed as a console.
And then you knew why you were the only one who had one.
We'll get more onto that later. That generation of consoles, especially for those like ourselves, currently in our 30s, that was like mind-blowing, those console generations.
Oh, yeah. It's still considered to this day as a golden era of gaming, really. There was a lot of amazing stuff that came out around that time, along with the 64, along with the PlayStation, things that kind of changed the game a little bit.
Changed the game. In the 90s, the early 90s, video games were nerdy. If you played video games, you were a nerd. And it's not the fun kind of nerd like it is nowadays if you're called a nerd because you like Star Trek or Doctor Who or the Avengers or whatever. It was a far more negative terminology to be called a nerd.
Mm-hmm.
By the time we reached late 90s, it had by far been more accepted in the mainstream. Everybody wanted the new games that were coming out. There was a whole new style of games. We'll cover that a little bit in a second. But just the accessibility, there was more 4-player titles, so you could actually get together with friends. It was unheard of prior to that to have a social gathering and video gaming at the same time.
Yes.
And that's why I've always loved couch co-op games in particular.
Local multiplayer.
Anything that you can play in the same room as other people and actually build off each other's energy, laughs going around. And I find that a degree of that gets lost if you play online. Even when I play games that can be played online, I still like to go across to the Falcon's house, set up our TVs side by side, and be in the same room. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. There's something different. You're more comfortable, I think, when you're playing with friends and it's, in the same shared space. You get to bounce off each other's energy in that room as well and feed off of that, and it makes for a more bonding experience. You can't get quite the same experience online, but also with a lot of online multiplayer, you have a lot of undesirables that, you can't necessarily filter out. I mean, sometimes you can have closed off kind of games where it's only people that you invite can join in, and that's okay. But if you're joining in something like Fortnite, where it's just so many people thrown into one game and everyone's talking, and you've got 12-year-olds smack talking you.
You really do sound like an old 30s.
I know.
30-year-old person.
I know I do, but honestly, I don't want them to ruin my experience. I want to play to have fun, and if I've got some brat that's being an absolute jerk online, then I don't want to play that game anymore, you know what I mean?
Well, thankfully, online capability was not a factor at this point in time.
You.
The Sega Dreamcast, coincidentally, the actual first internet-capable console for your home. Sega. See? They did so much cutting edge.
Is it Sega or Sega?
You say this every episode
No, I
that I
don't.
mention Sega.
I just do the...
Check the tapes.
I just do the Sega because I always hear that when you boot up Puyo Puyo Tetris.
Okay. What nation do we live in?
Australia.
What accent do I have?
A Bogan's one.
Which means when I say Sega, what do I say? Sega. I will say both. I have tried my best. I have tried my Aussie darndest to say Sega every episode, and occasionally it will slip and I will say Sega, okay? Just like the cheese brand Bega, okay? It's not Bega.
What the...
I'm just saying.
Again, like I mentioned when we were talking about Chupa Chups or Chupa Chups, which is a thing that still has not yet been settled, I will base how I pronounce something on the official imaging that I hear from a brand.
Okay.
So, and when I hear a game and it boots up and it says Sega, then that's how I'm like, well, that's how it's pronounced.
Okay, excellent.
So, this is it. And I wasn't picking like, that's the first time I've ever brought that up. Thank you. I will revisit all the podcast episodes.
I'm sure you have mentioned it at least once before.
No.
Or I'm incredibly insecure about the way I say it.
Yes. I love you. So where were we?
Oh, I have no idea. Where were we? Sega, right? I was talking about Sega. The main consoles at the 5th generation level that we know of would be the Sony PlayStation and the Nintendo 64. Now, there was also the Sega Saturn, which, surprise, released. We talked about this on our E3 show this year. They surprise released a console with no prior warning to the public that, hey, it's out, you can go buy it now. It's like, wait, what? I have no money left for this. You've made me buy 20 add-ons to your last console. There's no money left in the bank for this.
That only works when, Beyonce drops an album unannounced. Doesn't really work with anything else.
Also works quite well with free games like Fallout Shelter.
Well, but that's different. It doesn't cost you anything.
Exactly.
Except for data to download them.
Well, it doesn't matter anyway, because outside of Japan, where it actually did quite well, the rest of the world, the Sega Saturn did quite badly. Like, catastrophic sales figures. I'm not talking about Xbox One sales figures in Japan at the moment, where you see the Switch has sold 6,000 units or whatever, and the PlayStation 4 has sold this many, and the Xbox One has sold 6.
In the span of how many days?
Like a week.
Yes.
Yeah. Nationwide.
Mm-hmm.
That's catastrophic. But the Sega Saturn was a commercial failure, which meant they rushed the release of the Dreamcast at the tail end of 1998. Very interesting. We will look at that a little later on. Let me just rattle off some of the titles. I mean, there are arguments of which year in gaming is the best. There are several that are brought up. 1998 is one of them. 2003 is another one. They are among the most bountiful years when it comes to video game releases. Do you know what came out in 1998? Everything that you have ever loved. So if we check through this calendar of 1998 game releases, there are some absolute classics, okay? We're just going to hit on the major ones, the major points. Resident Evil 2 is where I'm going to start. A game that's actually getting remade at the moment. It's in development as we speak. As you listen to this podcast, it may already be done if you're listening too far ahead in the timeline that we've recorded this. But as we sit in this booth and record it, it's being developed. Unless they've already finished it and they're going to surprise launch it tomorrow. No, it's not going to happen at all. Never mind.
Wishful thinking, maybe.
Now, Resident Evil 2 was basically Resident Evil 1 broke new ground in the survival horror genre. But then Resident Evil 2 made it like infinitely better. Multiple characters. A game that you've never played, unfortunately.
Unfortunately. Yep. Not unfortunate.
It's amazing we ever got married. It improved many of the in-game dynamics. Much better story production. Better voice acting. That's a plus. Although there are still some shockers in there. And overall, it's hailed as quite possibly the best Resident Evil game of the early series. And that came out in January of 1998.
There you go.
Within the first month, we're already hitting the big bombs.
Then in March, one of my favourite games on the Nintendo 64, and I believe the first single-player campaign that I ever finished as a kid by myself, Yoshi's Story.
Yoshi's Story. Coincidentally, the first game my mother ever bet with no assistance.
Bet?
Bet. As in beat. As in completed.
I was going to say she placed some bets on it.
My mum made a bet.
I raise you Yoshi Story.
It makes sort of grammatical sense, I guess, in a weird, horrible way.
I'm sorry. I keep picking on your grammar today. Keep going.
Don't pick on my grandma. Pick on my mother. She's the one who beat Yoshi's Story. Ah! See, that was a joke, because Grandma was talking about my mother. Grandmother.
Oh, you're as in...
That took way too long to drop.
It really is Father's Day. There's terrible dad jokes going out the wazoo in this booth. My goodness, mister.
Yeah, I used to co-pilot a lot of my mother's gaming sessions around this era because she'd started to like anything that had a cute mascot. She would give a shot, whether it be Spyro the Dragon, which is being remastered as we speak, Crash Bandicoot, which has just been remastered quite recently, or even Yoshi.
And Ratchet and Clank.
Now, all those games I would co-pilot, but I'd also get that antsy, sort of like when someone else is driving and you're like, nah, this doesn't feel right, you're doing it wrong, you're braking far too late, what are you doing? You should have indicated earlier before that. What are you... Sort of like that when my mother was playing a game. I'm like, do you need me to do that jump? I can... Oh, here we go again. All right. That's not how I would have attacked that boss. That's fine.
A friend of ours, when I was young, I went over and I was playing Tomb Raider on their PlayStation. And I was just having fun just running around Lara Croft's mansion. I don't know which one it was, but you could just, before going and starting a mission or going to a certain area, you could run around her house.
It's like a training level.
Yes.
Yep.
And kind of like, in Super Mario where you can run around the castle before you go into a world. And I just ran around that and I didn't want to go and play anything and it was driving them nuts. They're like, no, do you want me to show you how to play this? And I'm like, no, I'm having fun. Drove them nuts.
I'm having fun. You're clearly not, but I'm having fun.
There's some people who just can't handle watching someone else play a game.
Yes, well, I was no stranger to that. That is for certain. And it was like, I imagine it was the exact same when she saw me graduate primary school, swelling with pride. I had the same feeling of happiness when my mother graduated from Yoshi's Story Academy and finally beat a game that's only 6 levels long by herself, but still an accomplishment. One that it seems you shared.
Yes, and even found the special black and white Yoshis that you had to rescue. Were hidden. So little things like that. Was very proud of those small achievements.
Now another big one. We were speaking of esports. And something that got quite the reputation for being played online came out in 1998 called StarCraft, the spiritual sequel, I guess you'd call it, of the Warcraft series at the time. Set in space, 3 different races at war. The Terrans, which were basically humans, the Zerg, which were basically aliens from Aliens, and the Protoss, which were basically predators from the Predator movies. High-tech, sort of futuristic aliens, savage, brutal aliens, and humans, which are the most evil of them all. Now, StarCraft got so much popularity being played online at one point, it may have actually been the official sport of South Korea.
Yes.
So that is absolutely bonkers. I used to play it against AI because at the time I was too afraid to play against humans. That's not the reason why I don't like playing primarily multiplayer games now. Let me get that completely clear. I'm not afraid of them. I just don't like to do it.
It is a little humiliating, though, when you go on any kind of multiplayer and you're just kind of getting used to a game and everyone else has been playing much longer than you have, and you make an absolute idiot of yourself getting killed or, doing something really stupid, and everyone's like, oh, okay, who's the noob that has joined this game?
Yeah, it always seems to happen too. It's embarrassing. There are some crackers on this list of games that came out in 98. Just to glance through a few of them: Marvel vs. Capcom, Final Fantasy Tactics, Xenogears, Gex, Enter the Gecko. Now, that was sort of a mascot that he was sort of popular, but not really. He just knocked off movies, and the levels looked like they had about 12 polygons each in them, but it was kind of fun at the time.
Now, one game that came out in 1998 that I think was definitely a game changer and really mind-bending, Metal Gear Solid. How's that for iconic?
Definitely a game changer. As far as a cinematic, it was no other game really felt like you were playing a movie to the degree that Metal Gear Solid did. It had the director credits on the screen during the introduction, cast, producer, all these sort of names, just like you would have in a movie.
Yeah.
It had a complex, tangled plot. It had memorable boss fights. It had everything you could ever want. It had weird things you could do. The fact that you could escape from a detention cell later in the game by laying on the floor and activating a ketchup packet to make a fake blood stain that when the guard returned, he thinks you're dead, that's complex, but it's not the only way you can escape that detention cell. Things like that. Metal Gear Solid has always been about playing with your little set of tools in a given situation.
Yeah.
How are you going to solve this? How are you going to do this?
And isn't that the one where you've got a boss fight where you can literally have to change the port that the controller is in?
Yes, a very famous boss fight, and
one that people got angry at their parents because they thought that their parents had disconnected their PlayStation from the TV because it would bring up an error screen thinking that it had been disconnected.
Yep.
That's trolling on another level right there.
The boss Psycho Mantis can apparently read your thoughts, and not only read your thoughts, he can read what's on your PlayStation memory card as well. And the way that you're getting around his psychic abilities, let's say, is to change your controller from port 1 to port 2 because he can't read the right-hand side of your brain. Now, how on earth anyone is supposed to know that is beyond me. However, when I first played it, that's not how I beat him.
No?
No, he dodges 7 attacks and then the 8th one will land. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of ammo, or you can try and punch him 7 times and then shoot him on the 8th and it will hit. And it just took an awfully long time because I had no idea what I was supposed to do in that. And then you read in a magazine, like, oh, this is how you can beat him. And you're like, well, who designed this?
Because you
Oh, it's
couldn't
Hideo
look up
Kojima,
online
that's why.
and say, how do I beat this? You can't go on forums and ask for help.
Even
wasn't
in the early
really a
days
thing
of that
then.
series, Hideo Kojima was messing with your brain.
I know. And wasn't there also like a code that's on the actual box, like the cover art?
Well, let's have another history lesson from Brendo. To battle early video game piracy, there would be video games that would say, okay, you want to play this game? What is the fourth word in the third paragraph on page 6 of the instruction manual? And you're like, I don't know. I bought it from a shady guy out of a van.
Or, borrowed it from a friend.
Early preventative ways of stopping their games from being pirated. And Metal Gear Solid had something similar where you have to contact a character and your superiors say, oh, you want to contact this person? Wasn't there frequency on the back of the CD case? And you're checking your inventory in the game going, what's the CD case? Do I have a CD? I don't understand what I'm supposed to do here. Little did anyone know, it's actually on the back of the actual CD case of the video game that you bought from the store in your real world, using your real world hands and real world money.
That's clever. That's really, really clever.
Clever. And again, if you pirated the game, guess what?
You were screwed.
You did not have that frequency to call.
Mm-hmm.
Little things that just make you go, what on earth?
But that kind of stuff is what has stood the test of time, though, too, with Metal Gear. And you see, like, in the games that followed after, once people kind of understood that that was the status quo, they kind of came in a little bit more prepared for those games and knew that they had to bring their A game as far as thinking outside the box.
They do come in a little more prepared, but then when the tail end of Metal Gear Solid 2 starts, everyone's like, I have absolutely no idea what's going on. They're telling me to turn off my actual console. What is happening here?
But jumping forward in time and with like PT when that demo came out and we found out that it was Hideo Kojima that had put it together, everyone's immediately like, oh, okay, well, the numbers that are on the screenshot on the menu must be important for something, and they found out that was, and all these little things, like there's so many hidden details, and you find other games, I think, that have borrowed from that formula and have taken inspiration and taken what works and made or, implemented it into their games. And so a lot of games that are from this time frame really have been, the foundation for a lot of the great games that we have now.
Absolutely. The previous generation, do you know what the largest storage size of a Super Nintendo cartridge was as far as a game? How much data that game took up?
Not much.
6 megabyte or something like that. The largest Super Nintendo game was 6 megabyte. Now, this generation, you're getting to the PlayStation 1 era that's using an actual CD. That's 650 megabytes available. Suddenly, the imaginations of these game developers has just been blown wide open that they can actually place what they're visualizing into a system that can harness that enough power to make it a reality.
Yeah.
A game like Metal Gear, the old school Metal Gear on the MSX and then later the games that came out on the NES, they have quite a lot of similarities with Metal Gear Solid, and it almost feels sometimes like a retelling. Like, this is what I wanted to make originally, but had no capacity to. And that's why it's actually quite fun to play those old school Metal Gear games, not Metal Gear Solid. I played these Metal Gear games on the HD collection, and it's amazing how many similarities there are as far as, I can use a remote control missile here to blow up an electrical cabinet so I can walk on what was once an electrical floor. Excellent. All these little things, you're like, hey, this is very familiar. It feels like suddenly these developers had the power to do what they always wanted to do. And as a result, there are a plethora, especially in this generation, but this year has quite a few masterpieces that would indeed pave the way for game design, game dynamics for years to come.
You're listening to the Gaming Lovers Podcast.
Want to join the conversation? Visit thegaminglovers.com. Record your comment or question by clicking on the button on the right-hand side. And you could be featured in the next podcast. Another game I can think of off the top of my head from 1998 is Baldur's Gate.
Oh, boy.
That is a game that has definitely been the foundation for a lot of games that we really love. So it's
My introduction to Dungeons and Dragons. Not that I'm 100% Dungeons and Dragons nerd, but I have some love for that setting and certain dark elf heroes and their 28 book series. Baldur's Gate, when that came out, Diablo was all the rage, and all my friends played Diablo. I didn't have Diablo.
No, me either.
And for me, that was just, it had the same viewpoint as Baldur's Gate, that isometrical top-down view, but all they did for their combat was click, 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 click. Click, 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 click. Just clicking their mouse. Just click, 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 click. Oh, I beat that enemy. Click, 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 click. I beat that enemy.
And they complain about games now that are one-button combat. Hypocrites. Sorry.
But Baldur's Gate, it took me probably 3 weeks of intensive study to actually understand how the game worked. Because I had to basically learn Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition rules. And that was like, okay, I've got these strength stats and they give me I've got a 16 strength, so that's +3. So that +3 gets added to what roll? The attack roll or the damage roll? I don't even know, I'm so confused. What am I? Am I a half elf? Do I get elf powers or just half the elf powers? Oh wait, the half elf is a different thing. Oh my goodness, who am I? It was incredibly complex, but the fact that it was calculating everything with random numbers, that made me happy. Because if there's one thing I enjoy in games, it's a little bit of chance. Not too much chance. Not Mario Party 8 level of chance, but just a bit of chance.
Yes.
Baldur's Gate had side quests. I actually played it last year? I believe I played it last year, the remastered edition. Everything we're talking about, I have played in like the past 2 years. This is astonishing. It introduced me to Jennifer Hale. It introduced me to Jim Cummings. It introduced me to a lot of my favourite voice actors over the years.
I'm sorry, how did you not know Jim Cummings from Winnie the Pooh as a child?
Well, I didn't understand that Winnie the Pooh and Minsk from Baldur's Gate were the same person, so... Minsk and Boo stand ready, apparently. But yes, not only the Baldur's Gate series, there were many other RPGs that used the same engine and the same D&D rules behind it, leading into, later on, one of my all-time, I'm talking top 5 games of all time, Knights of the Old Republic, Star Wars.
Oh, yeah!
So Baldur's Gate, innovating new ground for RPGs in the West. Pretty cool.
One of the most iconic games from that era, and one that you love. Probably one of your all-time favourite games.
One of my top 5 all-time favourite games. We're just handing those little titles out like candy today, aren't we?
Yep. Banjo-Kazooie.
To be fair, probably sits in that top 5, all jokes aside. I know that I had a Nintendo 64 in 1998 because I can distinctly remember in a certain class in high school, it was in a home economics room. We were doing maths in a home economics room for some reason. Yes, maths in the kitchen. But I was sitting there with a friend, seeing if I could remember from the top of my head all 120 stars from Super Mario 64. Now, he distinctly argued that it would be the best game of that system, bar none. Now, its direct competitor, probably Banjo-Kazooie. Very similar styles, 3D platformers, collectibles galore.
Yes.
I
Very
found
similar.
Banjo-Kazooie, controversial hot take here, you heard it here first, to be quite superior to Super Mario 64. Now, Super Mario 64 gets the honour of being the innovator as far as a 3D platform. It had basically never been done properly before. So props to that. And of course, when you're the first at anything, of course there's going to be some rough edges.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the areas are a bit bland, things like that. But when Banjo-Kazooie came out, I was head over heels in love with that game. It had character, it had charm, it had brilliant music, it had it was just a fun adventure.
Yep.
And I still replay it probably once every 18 months, at least. Any game that has a character called Bottles the Short-Sighted Mole deserves honour, in my book.
Yeah, it was a cute game. I think for me, with a lot of those platformers, I guess because of my age, I would chicken out when I got to a certain point in the game that I would just stop playing them. But I did love exploring certain levels in Banjo-Kazooie. I loved running around the beach. And
Treasure Trove Cove.
Yes. That was one of my favourite areas
Just
to
do
explore.
not go in the water.
No.
Dun, 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 dun. Oh yeah, another thing about Banjo-Kazooie that's absolutely adorable. Each character has a sound effect, basically, as their voice.
Mm-hmm.
Although the PlayStation had a disc-based, so it could stream audio off the disc, which could be used for either music or voice clips, the Nintendo 64's cartridge could not do that unless it was heavily compressed. And I'm talking heavily compressed, which means a lot of Nintendo 64 games avoided the use of any voice acting whatsoever.
Yep.
Now, what made Banjo-Kazooie fantastic is that each character simply needed about 3 different sounds
Yeah.
for their whole voice. And then it would scroll the subtitle, and Banjo would be there going, "Guh, guh, 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 guh." And that's all you need. One guh, and one guh. And you're done. And that's your whole voice for that character for the rest of the game. Splendid.
Easy voiceover job.
You've got people you got a hippo that burps. Captain Blubber, his name is. What could be better than that? You've got eagles. You've got everything. Everything you can imagine. And it's in Banjo-Kazooie with a fun voice, and that just adds to its charm. Spectacular game. And I love it so much. 20 years ago it came out. I feel ancient.
Another game that came out in 1998, and to me kind of reminds me a little bit of the Persona series, the way that this series kind of played out, in that the first 2, very different structure and gameplay, and then when it hit number 3, it's kind of when they found their stride and changed the tone and became amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Fallout number 2 came out in 1998.
Yes, see, now you grew up in the first-person Fallout era.
Mm.
Very different to the, again, Baldur's Gate almost style, isometric viewpoint down,
Yep.
turn-based sort of combat system, very stat-based. You got conversations. It actually feels quite similar now that I've laid that out. Fallout was not quite... It was more of a cult classic than anything back in those days.
Mm.
But it certainly grew in popularity in the later days when Bethesda took over and gave it the same engine as the Elder Scrolls games.
Yeah.
And away they went into the mainstream.
Yes.
I had heard of the Fallout games, but I also had heard they used naughty words. And since I was just a young lad at the time, never actually played Fallout 2.
There you go. But yeah, they do look very, very different. You see screenshots of them and you're like, this is in the same game series?
Yeah, sometimes it's very jarring when a game series completely bucks the trend of its predecessors and goes in a completely different direction.
And it's different because, you look at Assassin's Creed is having a very noticeable change in direction, but it still looks the same in the sense of art style and the tone and the way the game plays. It's just going in a more, I guess, RPG style. Yep. Whereas, this is going from changing basically almost the gameplay and the way the story is told. It's a complete overhaul. So it's all it is keeping the lore and the name, really, the brand, and everything else is different. So that if you had been a fan of those first 2, you might have really hated seeing it get completely changed like that. But for me, I guess because we came in at number 3, I can't imagine playing the others. Same with the Persona series. I'm so accustomed to the later versions that the older ones just seem too jarring.
Yeah, and any series that's lasted that many years and has gone through generations and changed its style completely, I'm sure there's people who picked up the Resident Evil series in the 4, 5, and 6 games, and if they went, oh, okay, I'll start this series from the start, it would play completely differently, and they'd be completely lost as to how to actually do it. Some more games that absolutely hit the mark with me, resonated with my young self on my old clunky butt computer that I had back then. My younger sister talked about it a few episodes back. Commandos, Behind Enemy Lines, fun little strategic squad-based game. However, another strategic squad-based game that came out in 1998, Rainbow Six. Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six. Now, what made that so shocking to play is that it was a first-person shooter, but basically, you got shot, you died. For someone who grew up on Doom, Wolfenstein, Duke Nukem, Quake, anything, on an easy difficulty, you can be a bullet sponge and nothing can stop you. However, when you play Rainbow Six, you start off with a blueprint 3D map of the area. You say, okay, this squad's going to go in from this window, this squad through this door, and we will synchronize these times to break in at the same time, and then you take control of it, and suddenly the heart rate goes up because as soon as you kick that door open, a baddie's probably going to shoot at you, and if he hits you like once or twice, that person is dead, or at least severely injured. And that was so stressful. So stressful. I can't even put it into words. Unless you've played it, you wouldn't understand. And a Rainbow Six is another series that, again, nowadays looks completely different.
Yes.
Basically a completely online multiplayer game, squad-based, with all sorts of gadgets and gizmos at your disposal.
Gadgets and gizmos
it all
aplenty.
started.
Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
The new operator has arrived, Ariel, with her
Trident.
thing hopper. What is it called?
Dingle hopper.
Yeah. But it all started, and Tom Clancy ended up having lots of games. Splinter Cell, Tom Clancy. The Division, Tom Clancy. Rainbow Six, Tom Clancy. I'm sure there was more, but that's all I can really think of now.
Mm.
And there were a lot of Rainbow Six games, but Rainbow Six, the first one, 1998.
As we go through iconic games from 1998, we cannot forget Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow. Now, Yellow technically only came out that year in Japan, but over in, the States and Europe and Australia, we got Red and Blue.
Yes.
So, our whole lives changed in 1998, I think.
I agree completely. I still cannot believe that growing up, there was no TV before school. But for whatever reason, my mother was feeling quite benevolent on a certain day and said, okay, you can watch TV today. I'm
Or fed up, maybe.
Oh, thank you. What a blessing you've
Shut up and sit in
bestowed
front of
upon
the
me.
TV.
That day, the first day I was ever allowed to watch television before school was the very first episode of Pokemon.
Wow.
And if that's not coincidence enough, my best friend at the time also was in a similar boat, saw the first episode of Pokemon, and we both fell in love with Pokemon, not each other.
Thanks for the clarification.
And there was no Pokemon merchandise or anything around the place. Like, Pokemon is everywhere now. You can walk into a Nintendo-themed store, there'll be Pokemon plushies galore. Pokemon is on games, it's on posters, it's on everything. Back then, the only way you could learn about a new Pokemon was on the show. So every day, because
you had to learn them and try
the
to guess
show
them
is
from
basically
the silhouettes.
the show is basically
Who's that
themed.
Pokemon?
One new Pokemon's revealed every show. Basically, this is what this show's about. It's this
And
one.
can I just say, I think Jigglypuff has one of the best introductions
Oh,
of any of the Pokemon characters.
obviously popular enough because Jigglypuff becomes a recurring character
Oh, yes.
later in the first season.
With a kind of angry little grunt that she does when everyone's fallen asleep because of her singing.
Now, there'll be a couple of confessions here,
Okay.
to be fair. The first of which is because we didn't know how a lot of these Pokemon names were written. So, for the longest time, I thought the Pokemon Coughing, which is like a poison ball of gas, and its name is Coughing.
You thought it was spelt the same way the word was?
No, I thought its name was Coffee.
Oh.
For probably about 2 months after anime started, I thought its name was Coffee, and I didn't understand why, because everything else was a pun. Why is this ball of gas that has poison and makes you choke called Coffee? Well, guess what? It's actually called Coughing.
Coughing. That's cute. I can't remember when the trading cards came out, because obviously we both collected those, and that's how we learnt a lot of their spellings, but also like the details of just how strong they were, what they were immune to, what they were strong against. And you would play, if you didn't have the video games, you would do battles, but in card form.
Mm-hmm.
And I have so many memories of playing that at school with different friends, or even on camps and stuff like that, on bunk beds, sitting and bringing out my Pokemon cards.
Now, the first Pokemon game I ever played was Pokemon Blue, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was jealous when you mentioned your Game Boy Color before.
Yeah.
Now, we had end-of-school activities at the end of 98, and one of the activities I picked, you could pick like go-karting and, all these sort of fun activities, day at the beach, whatever you wanted. One of them was computer games. So, of course, me being a gamer said, I'm down for that. And the IT department of the school had loaded certain like MS-DOS games and things onto the PCs in a certain room at school. And we're like, awesome. That's where I was playing Duke Nukem 2. Things like that. Like old school Jazz Jackrabbit, Cosmo, who was a little green dude with like suction cups for hands. Just these old 2D platformers. And that was fine. Until my friend discovered that, hey, on this computer, I can play Pokemon Blue. And I'm like, what the heck are you talking about? That's on Game Boy. You can't play video games outside of a console. And that's where I was first introduced to the world of emulators.
Oh.
Now, I didn't have a Game
How
Boy.
rare back then.
I didn't have a Game Boy. I may have played Pokemon Blue in 1998 because I didn't understand how it was being played on my computer. I was helping and aiding and abetting piracy spreading through Australia without even knowing what it was.
Oh.
But yes, that's how I technically played Pokemon Blue. I've since bought that game on the DS to simply clear my debt to society.
Wait, I need to clarify something. As far as that game, had that been preloaded by like a teacher?
No.
Or had the
someone
like,
else managed to put it on there, and promptly it was copied onto about 1,000 1.44-inch floppy disks and distributed amongst the school.
Oh no.
So there we go.
I was going to say that sounds an awful lot like that school for a teacher to do that, if it was.
No, I don't think it was.
Oh dear.
But yes, if you want to talk about a game that broke the mold as far as the gaming industry, Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, how many copies of those have they sold?
How many amazing games came out in 1998?
Oh,
like seriously.
There are so many. We won't even have time to cover them all. I mean, there are things like Turok 2. Turok was big on the Nintendo 64. It's a first-person shooter, but there's dinosaurs.
Have we
How
mentioned
incredible.
Half-Life?
We haven't not mentioned Half-Life. Probably the biggest PC game at that point, Half-Life.
Yes.
Another first-person game, but fully immersive. You are in that head, start to finish, and you see the whole game from your viewpoint. You start off your day going to work normally. You end up causing just a minor rift in reality, and aliens appear, and suddenly there's all sorts of things, like a giant creature with hook noses that will bash the ground trying to eat you, but it can't see you, it can only hear you. So if you walk quietly, it doesn't know where you are. Things like that. Again, simple things, but totally innovative in the gaming landscape. Half-Life was phenomenal. And when I finally got a PC that could run it, oh yes, I loved that game. So many. Crash Bandicoot Warped, which was the third game in the Crash Bandicoot series, was fantastic. Tomb Raider 3, a lot of sequels to established series that were hitting home run after home run. But can we go past 1998 without talking about The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. Did you play it? What were your thoughts?
I didn't actually play it. It wasn't one of the games that we had on our Nintendo 64. And it was one of those games that I heard about when I was older and we were kind of moving forward as far as like generations of games and things like that. And people would mention it. And one of my best friends had one of the toy models of the ocarina and knew like all the buttons and stuff for the different songs. I'm like, oh, I've never really played that. And so it wasn't until much later that I discovered it. And, you know, Link and all his chicken throwing fun.
Probably discover the impact it had on the gaming landscape as well. You could argue it's one of the earlier open world style games, even though the open world itself is quite condensed. Another game that I actually played this year, Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time on the 3DS. But still, pretty darn good.
Share the love. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gaming Lovers. There's one game that came up as we were doing some research for this that caught my attention purely because of its ridiculousness, and it reminds me of another video game, and I'm wondering if it's actually an Easter egg that I never realized.
Mm-hmm. What would that be?
Okay, so in Mass Effect, there is this jellyfish. Well, they look like jellyfish. They're called Hannah. And one of them is like this famous actor who plays a character called Blasto. And it's like this ongoing joke throughout the series, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as we were doing research for this, I found that there is a game that came out on the PlayStation called Blasto. And I'd never heard of it before. And now I'm wondering if Blasto was named after this character as like this subtle little Easter egg. I don't know.
I do not think it was.
Well, it would be funny though. You never know. There might have been someone that worked at BioWare that had worked on that game or loved that game themselves and decided to throw that in there as a really obscure reference. I just find that really interesting.
Okay, read me the
Caught my
plot.
attention. All right.
Just warning you. I'm setting you up to fail here.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
After returning from the fifth dimension, the diabolical alien tyrant named Bosk is bent on conquering the planet Uranus with his own army and attempts to invade and destroy Earth as well. He is seeking to reign supreme for his power of the solar system that includes his alien army capturing and enslaving the space babes throughout the galaxy.
Okay.
Thus,
it's in space.
Mm-hmm.
Is this Mass Effect?
With space babes.
Probing Uranus.
There's an Easter egg in that too. Thus, Captain Blasto is the only hero who can foil him in his evil ambitions and set out to rescue the stranded space babes along the way. Blasto is also the only type of hero who doesn't mind catching space babes in distress every now and then, especially when it comes to... I'm not going to finish that sentence.
Objection, Duke Nukem would be all about the space babes. Let's move on from Blasto.
No. Just that kind of adds a little credence to my theory of it being an Easter egg because he's set in space and Blasto in the Mass Effect universe is kind of like this weird James Bondish space spy and deals with...
I think you are barking up the complete wrong space babe
I need to like tweet some of the developers and be like, come on guys, just prove a theory right.
Oh, actually it's copyright infringement because there was already a superhero called Blasto in...
But it's not a jellyfish.
It's not jellyfish at all. You know what else is not a jellyfish?
Many
things, including Star Wars Rogue Squadron. I was well into my Star Wars fandom at this point, and boy, did I enjoy this game. Star Wars Rogue Squadron. The thing is, this game actually started off because there was a previous Star Wars game called Shadows of the Empire, which, for the most part, was relatively bad. But there was one level where you did the Battle of Hoth in a snowspeeder, and that gameplay was so good, they basically said... Yeah, the rest of the game's rubbish, but can you make us a game with that?
Just that.
And
all that.
just all that, and you'll be golden. And sure enough, it had many sequels, and it was fantastic. And quite often will hold a warm, furry, Wookiee-shaped place in our hearts as Star Wars fans.
Kind of ironic since it's set on the planet Hoth.
Well, it's set on many planets.
You mentioned Hoth,
I did.
so
That was the example one.
Just go with my joke.
There was also a rather terrible South Park first-person shooter that was just weird because the whole concept of South Park is that it's a 2D show and they had to make these blocky polygon models to try and make it a 3D first-person shooter, which just did not work at all. Thief, The Dark Project, one of the first stealth first-person games to ever come out. And how, of course, could we forget Mario Party?
Oh, one of my favorites.
This year, if you just look at the Nintendo lineup for this year, it is bang, 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 bang. Pretty darn great. The start of many, many franchises that will live on probably forever.
Yes.
We've got a new Mario Party game coming out 20 years later. Super Mario Party on the Switch.
So excited.
Should be fun.
I can't wait.
But
I'm really looking forward to that.
we've mentioned before on this podcast, the first Mario Party game did cause quite a few trips to the emergency room.
Yes, and a lot of blisters on hands. From all of the rotating of the joystick, stupid rowing of that raft.
There were mini games where you had to rotate the control stick as quickly as you could, and many people figured out the fastest way was not with your thumb, but with the palm of your hand, and simply spin your hand around. Now, the problem with that is the Nintendo 64 thumbstick, very unforgiving.
Oh, yes.
Very unforgiving. There's no rubber cap on that like every other
it's
console.
not soft, it is hard plastic.
And so it has more structural strength than your hand does, and so your hand gives.
Although some people would be so rough with it that they'd snap the joystick out of the controller in those mini games and ruin their poor controllers.
Shocking. Thankfully, I joined the Mario Party train, Mario Party 2. So my controllers and my hands, consequently, never had to suffer that trauma.
We never had Mario Party 2. We went from 1 to 3.
Oh, there you go.
I think because our parents because games, even back then, weren't cheap. So we only got certain ones, and the other times we'd have to kind of be at the mercy of our friends or relatives to borrow things.
Or the good old video shop.
Yes! Oh my goodness, yes.
Now, there's a podcast discussion for another day.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up, one last game from 1998. How could we forget?
I have one, let me tell you, squeaking in at the lovely release date, I believe, of December 23rd. What better time would there be to buy a brand new console and a game than Christmas in Japan? Sonic Adventure squeaks in. It got released in 1998, and I don't care if it's a Japan release only, it got released in 1998. Now, you look at the big three from that year that we've talked about. For the PlayStation, Metal Gear Solid.
Yes.
Okay? Graphically, looks like you're trying to see through very bad 3D goggles at times, and everything's blurry, and you can't understand where someone's arm begins and the wall ends. Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, quite bland, large textures. Open areas, yes, but there's not really a lot to look at that's pretty in that game. Sonic Adventure, Sega Dreamcast. They have gone, well, the Saturn didn't do that well, let's make another console immediately and make it twice as powerful as everything else. And it was, and the graphical improvements on that Dreamcast, that Sonic game looked like nothing else anyone had seen before on a console level. And that was astonishing, the difference. In the same year, these three games, night and day, Sonic is the best. Sonic number one. Now, would it last the test of time? Sonic Adventure nowadays, I wouldn't recommend anyone go near with a 10-foot Eggman robot stick. But The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time stands the test of time. Metal Gear Solid stands the test of time. Unfortunately, Sonic Adventure plays quite badly, despite how good it looked at the time. And of course, being the Sonic fan that I am, I will still play it every few years and cry myself to sleep afterwards. The Dreamcast is a fascinating console to look at as far as the history of video games go. And I want to dedicate an entire podcast one of these days to the ill-fated Sega Dreamcast.
We might do that in a future episode.
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, it is time for gaming goals.
Well, what game from 1998 do you intend to beat this week?
None of them.
None of them. Did any of them actually appeal to you? Whether it's something you have played in the past that you want to go back and replay at some point, not pressuring you to do it this week, or just something that piqued your interest and you're like, ooh, I like the look of those.
Mario Party. We've got that. Or Yoshi's Story. I love Yoshi's Story. Just the music immediately takes me back to my childhood.
It'll only take you like 45 minutes to beat Yoshi's Story. You could have a nostalgia trip through that.
But then I'd have to hear the high-pitched noise from the TV from that, and then I don't know if I can deal with that kind of headache right now.
All right, so apart from CRT-induced headaches, what are you actually intending on playing this week? Will you, at long last, be brave enough to tackle Detroit Become Human?
I would like to. I want to say yes, but a part of me is going to put like a little asterisk next to that and say so long as the work project that I'm doing at the moment doesn't demand more of my time. So if I'm able to, I might try to squeeze that in on hours that I know I'm not working and such. So
part of you says you want to.
I do.
A lot of me says that I want you to because
you
I have to
play
play it as well, and I can't play it until you're done.
No, I know, because you have to do it last. So it depends. I don't know how long the gameplay. Like, how long does it take to beat that?
I'd say roughly 10 hours.
Okay. Well, maybe I can, in a day or two, knock that out with some big sessions and just go from there. So marathon it and get it out of the way. That sounds bad.
I don't want to say the Gaming Endurers podcast.
Not in the sense of that it's something that has to be done in a sense that it's awful, but just like get it so that way you can then enjoy it as well. Like not drag it out. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. No, I understand. Trust me. As someone who's still tossing up whether to keep doing side missions in Yakuza 5 or just to blast through the main story and get it done, I understand completely where you're coming from.
Now, I have been a little negligent with Persona Q, so I want to get back into that. Although knowing that Persona Q2, I've got a bit of time because I don't think it comes out for a while, even in Japan, let alone going to be localized here.
The Gaming Procrastinators podcast.
So it's going to be one of those things I think I can drip feed, so that way hopefully I can finish it, and then number 2 will be out, and then I'll be like, yeah, right off the back of that momentum, hopefully.
Hopefully. Although it could be dangerous trying to run 2 of those large, grindy games in quick succession.
Possibly.
Could be to your detriment.
Not always, though. I've found with some other games that I've done where I've gone one into the other, it's helped me spur further because I've got the other stuff fresh in my mind, and so I'm excited to keep the story going. It's like binge watching a TV series. I finished season 1. I want season 2 now, damn it.
Yeah, well, I figure you are better at that than I am. I prefer to have 4 plates spinning at once and have a little half hour of each. If I would like a bit of variety on my plate, I can have it. I will be playing Yakuza 5. I will try my darndest to beat it. I think I said the exact same phrasing last week. Maybe I'm not actually here. Maybe this was all pre-recorded a week in advance. No, it's not, because I sound much healthier. That's a complete conspiracy theory. I am also probably going to do my best to ignore Fire Emblem Awakening again, because Octopath Traveler has its little pixelated tentacles in my brain, and I love it so much. That's what I'm going to play this week. I hope you have enjoyed our little trip in our time machine to 1998. If you have a favourite game that came out in 1998, please let us know on all of our social media, all of them at the same time. I guess this is it.
You can always leave us a message on our website at thegaminglovers.com. All the links to the streaming channels are there as well. Until next time, sayonara.
And we will see you when we see you.
We never technically see them.
Thanks for listening to the Gaming Lovers podcast. For more episodes or to watch some live stream gaming, visit thegaminglovers.com.